challenges facing faith-based schools. We're lucky we get to be the Hope panel. We're going to tell you about what's working in faith-based schools to serve at-risk children in inner cities so that demography is not destiny for them. So often we hear about the inner city failures, but faith-based schools offer an intervention that works. I was particularly struck by the data that show a Latino child is 42% more likely to graduate high school and more than 2 times more likely to attend college if that child attended a Catholic grade school. That's the kind of success that we can certainly use more of. It's an honor to introduce our panel to you today because they're all playing a part in creating vibrant schools that are part of that city on the hill that everyone can look up to for hope. I'll introduce them to you alphabetically and ask you to hold your applause until they've all been presented. First, we have Christian Dallavis. Christian is the Senior Director of Leadership Programs for the Alliance for Catholic Education, ACE, at Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame. Dallavis is the founding director of the Notre Dame ACE Academies, which are an innovative new model for Catholic schools. He's often described by his colleagues as a visionary, and his research has been published in a host of scholarly journals. He also heads up the leadership program for principals at Notre Dame called the Marianne Remick Leadership Program, which is a 26-month intensive program. I noticed that his undergraduate studies were in English and Japanese, but he has agreed to speak English for this program. Dr. Terry Flowers is a trailblazer, a teacher, and a community thought leader. He is the headmaster and executive director of the wonderfully successful St. Philip's Academy here in Dallas. In addition to his work at St. Philip's, Dr. Flowers also teaches at SMU and at Cedar Valley College. I'm omitting the education credentials of our panelists because you have them in your program and to keep things moving along, but I have to point out Dr. Flowers holds the record for the number of degrees on our panel. He has a bachelor's degree in education, 3 master's degree in education, and a doctorate in education. So you might say he is the most well-prepared for this panel. Next is Kole Knueppel. Kole is the co-founder and managing director of school partnerships at Schools That Can Milwaukee. Kole was the director for Wisconsin Lutheran Center for Urban Teaching, training future teachers and school leaders to be successful in Milwaukee's urban schools. He's a teacher and principal trainer. Before that, Kole served as superintendent of Hope Christian Schools, where he led the expansion of Hope from 1 campus with 50 students to 3 campuses with more than 500 students in 4 years. Dramatic change. Kole also led the revitalization of the St. Marcus School from low-performing urban school to a high-performing, nationally recognized model for faith-based urban education. Next we have Matthew Moes. Matthew is from here in Dallas. Matthew is the vice chair of the Islamic Schools League of America, ISLA. I looked online. I believe they have 235 schools nationally affiliated with ISLA. And just to show you the scope of where the schools are, there are 26 in Texas, 35 in California, and 30 in New York, just to give you a couple of examples. ISLA is an organization that works to foster the development, growth, and quality of Islamic education in North America. For more than 16 years, Matthew served as a teacher. He was a social studies teacher and principal in Islamic schools in the United States. He also serves as an accreditation reviewer and has partnered with other organizations in developing accreditation standards. So won't you join me in giving a warm welcome to all of our panelists. Welcome them to Dallas. I'll start with a question thought out to all of you to answer. What is the big idea behind what you're doing and that you aspire to do? Why is it important? Why is what you're doing important? And what does it matter that your schools exist for the underserved populations of the city? Perhaps go this way?
Sure. So for the Notre Dame ACE Academies, the big idea is that we set two goals for our students, college and heaven. And we set both the goals high in terms of educational attainment and eternal life. But our mission is to provide a Catholic education of the highest quality to as many children as possible. And what that means is two things. We focus on academic achievement in our schools. We really want to improve the quality of academic opportunity that children from low-income areas have. And that includes strong faith formation and preparation for personal life. And then we focus on access. We focus on trying to improve those kids' access to high-quality educational options. And the reason that's important for us is because there aren't very many paths to college in a lot of our neighborhoods and urban areas. And the ACE Academies are K through 8 schools located in places where there are parental choice scholarships. We have 3 in Tucson, Arizona, 2 in the Tampa Bay and St. Petersburg area currently. And in the south side of Tucson, there just aren't very many paths to college. There's barely half of the kids can expect to graduate from high school from the neighborhoods that we serve. And in our information economy, we know that having a high school diploma and a college degree are more important than ever. It's associated with unemployment as an adult, wages, incarceration, teen pregnancy, even mortality rate is significantly higher for kids who don't have a high school diploma or don't attend college. So we think every 5-year-old deserves a clear path to college and heaven, and so we do whatever it takes to create more of those paths for kids in neighborhoods like South Tucson.
We're St. Philip's School and Community Center, and we have many big ideas, and I guess we would say, as our students say, it's okay to pray, and it's okay to make an A. And we basically take a lot of pride in making sure that we don't admit admit students, that we admit families, and that we hold parents accountable for their children's education. We believe that there's no child that has been conceived by a school, and therefore it's a parent's responsibility to raise those children, to educate those children, and so we push very hard on parental involvement and create an environment that has allowed us to not only have a great track record academically, but to also leverage ourselves to be a catalyst for urban revitalization in our community. So if you were to come to St. Philip's, you'd find that in addition to the school program with 240 children from pre-K up to the 6th grade, you'd find a food pantry, you'd find a campus that stays open until 8 o'clock at night, providing a hot meal 4 nights a week free of charge to kids up to 18 years of age. You would find a depot for Meals on Wheels. You'd see our school bus being used to pick up senior citizens, to take them to the grocery store, the pharmacy, the post office. You'll find 1,700 kids who come to utilize the campus as they would a boys club or a YMCA type program with 5 football teams and 37 basketball teams, and a myriad of services that extend themselves to the surrounding community that has allowed us to be able to attract Habitat for Humanity to the community, where there were no building permits issued in the decades of the 70s or the 80s. And now there are 22 Habitat houses on the ground and another 60 homes that have been built, because the intent was to not create only Habitat houses, but have a mixed income neighborhood. So the opportunity for students to see scholarship, spirituality, service, and have all of that take place and see it before their very eyes, with the intent that they'll go off to make billions of dollars, and when they do that, they'll have a sensitivity to the communities across the country that are similar to what we see here at South Dallas.
So I'm the co-founder of Schools That Can Milwaukee, and Schools That Can Milwaukee is a citywide initiative to create a tipping point in Milwaukee to close the achievement gap for the entire city. So the first step in doing that is getting to 20,000 students in high-performing schools by 2020. And we were launched 3 years ago by a faith-based school leader and 2 charter school leaders who very selflessly and in a spirit of generosity said, you know, we could grow our own schools and continue to build our own kingdoms, if you will, but we need to do something to make a broader impact on our city. And so out of that discussion, they were meeting with me, and we were trying to figure out how to create a greater impact for Milwaukee. Out of that discussion, Schools That Can Milwaukee was born. And so we essentially have 3 pathways. Pathway 1 is expansion and replication of existing high-performing schools. And so typically that's fundraising or helping them secure facilities, working with advocacy groups to help them expand. Pathway 3 is recruiting charter management organizations to Milwaukee or faith-based organizations to Milwaukee to launch schools and open new schools. And then Pathway 2, which is primarily the work that I do, is coaching high-potential schools and teaching them, and coaching high-potential school leaders and teaching them how to create high-performing schools within existing schools in our neighborhoods in the central city of Milwaukee. And so we have 34 schools in our network as of this fall. Many of those schools are in the high-potential category, existing community assets that we're coaching and teaching them how to create a high-performing urban school. And part of what's interesting, and I think part of the reason that I'm here, I would guess, our movement is very much a cross-sector movement. So we're working with district schools, we're working with charter schools, we're working with faith-based schools. The school that Christian has been to a number of times is St. Marcus. We did a massive turnaround there. It was a failing faith-based school, created a high-performing environment, very loving environment, and that has led to much of the work we're doing now, taking the concepts in that school and teaching other schools how to do that. And in a city like Milwaukee, we've got a talent issue, so we've got to teach people how to do the things that we know how to do. And that's our big theory of change.
Wonderful. Matthew?
I'm here in relation to the Islamic Schools League of America. The Islamic schools in the United States and Canada are probably the newcomers to the faith-based school arena. Majority of our 235 schools have opened within the last 20 years, although some have opened earlier than that, even going back a few decades before. There are really 2 strands of Islamic schools that have developed here, one being the Claire Muhammad schools that have developed out of the Nation of Islam and have transitioned towards what we would call mainstream, or referred to as mainstream Islam, over the years as that organization has transitioned. And the other strand, which more or less developed independently with perhaps some minor interaction, is with the newly arriving immigrant populations of Muslims coming into the United States. And these are really 2 very different types of experiences, whereas the Claire Muhammad schools would serve primarily African American students in more urban areas. The Islamic schools serving immigrant populations would more than likely be located in suburban areas, but nonetheless provide an important transition point for new American families. And kind of giving that background, each one of these, every single school, ISLA is not a governing organization. We are kind of a loose association, if you will, just providing an opportunity for these schools, which are governed and started independently, governed independently, started organically in each of their respective communities. We provide an opportunity for those schools to interact, to learn from each other, and to have some professional development opportunities and share resources, hopefully, going forward. So having given you that background, now I'll address perhaps our big idea, which I think echoes a lot of what we've heard. The most important purpose of Islamic schools, regardless of which category we're talking about, is to provide an educational environment where the awareness of God is part and parcel of the development and growth of the child. And we have this concept of a whole child here in public education, and we borrow ideas from that in our schools as well. But it seems to me that you cannot really have a whole child without without addressing the essential aspect of human nature in terms of our divine source, and as we say, from God we come and to Him we'll return. So the divine source and the point of where we'll go back to after we die. So these are the most important fundamental questions in our facing our existence. So how we could have the whole educational system designed in absence of a meaningful way to address those questions is a tremendous challenge, I think. Faith-based schools and Islamic schools in particular have felt that that is the main idea, the impetus for why they need to exist.
I'm curious, if you trademarked that phrase, "Our goal is college to heaven," because I'm sure there's some school people here who are going to steal it.
I think I actually stole it from one of the Kole schools in Milwaukee. So we're just putting our name on it as much as we can so that,
Imitation the sincerest form of flattery.
Yep.
Well, I'll throw out a couple of single questions to each one of you, and if one of the others has a blazing thought, feel free to jump in. But I'd like to follow up, Terry, you mentioned parental involvement. So often when I talk to school leaders, they say their biggest problem is getting parents involved. What are you doing? What works, and how are you doing this to get the parents in the community involved to get buy-in?
We make it mandatory.
Oh, that'll
So
do it.
America's greatest flaw in the educational system is that somehow we have convinced our citizens that it's not their job to educate their children. And so we've created a foundation that says, I didn't conceive your child, and you're not allowed to abdicate that responsibility to us. We're just a tool. A school is simply a tool to be used to educate your child. So parental involvement is mandatory. If you don't come to parent-teacher conferences, you don't get to stay. Have you sign a contract that says, I will attend parent-teacher conferences, I will volunteer for the school, I will observe in the classroom. And at the bottom it says, if at any time the school feels that I am not upholding my minimal right, my minimal responsibilities to educate my child, they may ask me to leave. On top of this, we charge for the families to come to our school. So there's a sliding scale. Everyone has to pay something. And we will naturally attract a family who is committed to their child's education. And that has been our success. We have 100% high school graduation rate, and we stop at 6th grade, and 97% of those kids go to college. If you would think about the most successful students in our nation academically, close your eyes, and there's the image of an Asian student that comes to your mind. We assume automatically, well, why are those students so successful? Well, their families bring an intensity. They bring a focus that is purely on making sure that they succeed in the classroom. And we can instill that in the spirits of the parents who are out there. And we just choose as a country to take on those responsibilities ourselves, and we'll create driver's ed programs and sex ed programs and all of these things that parents should be holding themselves responsible for.
And relegate it to the schools. Well, now, Kole, you have such extensive background in leadership training. What is it that makes a school leader a platinum level leader? What is he or she thinking and doing that takes a school from good to great?
Yeah, so our challenge is working to create leaders like the ones you're talking about. And so part of our theory of change, and I referenced this before, is identifying people who Jim Collins in Good to Great would call potential level 5 leaders. And often potential level 5 leaders are, and this is a concept, Good to Great gets referenced ad nauseum these days, but one of the concepts that people often overlook is the fact that Collins says in that book that potential level 5 leaders are often overlooked, and they're all around us. We just need to know what traits to identify in them, and then invest in them and teach them how to become level 5 leaders. And so part of our model, we have 6 traits that we look for. So these are in existing schools. We're looking for school leaders that are humble and coachable. We're looking for school leaders that are honest and transparent in what they do. We're looking for school leaders that have really good work ethic. We're looking for school leaders that have good people skills. We're looking for good leaders that are collaborative, willing to learn from others. And then finally, and this is the one that unfortunately many of our school leaders fail on probably across many of our urban centers in America, is belief that the achievement gap can be closed, belief in low-income students of color to perform at a really high level and go to college or do whatever they want to do with their lives. And I'm saying that in all sectors, in district, charter, faith-based. We have the biggest issue there with number 6. And so what we believe is if a leader has those traits, and basically we took Colin's research, we drew a lot on Carol Dweck and growth mindset, and Patrick Lencioni and a lot of his work about how leaders run great organizations. We believe if somebody has those 6 traits, we can teach them to become a transformational leader and to transform a school. I think the other thing that we believe is that there are enough schools now across our country that are closing the achievement gap. There are literally hundreds of schools now. And this wasn't true 20 years ago. There are literally hundreds of schools closing the achievement gap. We can actually identify how to do it, list those things out, and teach high character people how to run high performing schools. The big challenge for us, and I'm going to echo a little bit of what Terry was asking about before in terms of the urgency of the church. We have so many advantages in that we have facilities. We're anchored in neighborhoods, and I'm talking about faith-based schools now. And what we lack is transformational leaders, transformational leadership, both in terms of the pastorate and the principals in those schools. And that's probably our biggest challenge. Many of the high-performing charters are dying to get facilities. We have facilities. We have existing community assets. We have a lot of advantages. But we've got to get much more aggressive about developing leaders, identifying people that can be transformational leaders, and investing in those leaders.
Terrific. Christian, how important is the religious component of your schools? Is the moral salience of a faith-based school important? Is it important that faith-based schools are faith-based?
It is. It's critical to us. I don't think you can divorce academic achievement and the education that happens in the school from, in our case, the Catholic identity of the school. We work to put kids on the path to college, not just because we want them to have jobs and make a lot of money, but because we believe that every child is formed in the image and likeness of God, and it's our job as educators to fully form their God-given talents so they can live lives that make God known, loved, and served. We have a saying that we put on our kids' t-shirts that says, whatever it takes is what it takes. And we really believe that's in the classrooms where we're seeing kind of the most dramatic academic growth. It's where there are teachers who are willing to do whatever it takes. And for us, that only gets you so far unless, the idea that whatever it takes is what it takes, it only gets you so far unless you are totally convinced, unless you have kind of an unshakable conviction that what you're doing is forming saints. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, why do whatever it takes?
Right. Well, now, Matthew, the Islamic schools are probably the less well-known in the education community. Could you talk about any particular issues that you face?
Well, I think that what is important, as I mentioned, being newcomers to the faith-based school arena, so to speak, that we are going through a lot of the challenges, the same challenges, and we have a lot of the same issues that other faith-based schools have. And I think that it's wonderful to have an opportunity to be here today because we need to learn a lot more from each other and recognize that while we are more or less, taking advantage of this, of the blessing of being able to have the religious freedom to raise our children in a school environment where they can fully develop within the faith that the family that family has, that each family has, that we also have commonalities with other faith-based groups and the same challenges organizationally, resource-wise, and otherwise that we can learn from each other through, mm-hmm. and mutually support each other with, and so. In addition to this, perhaps because of the newness of Islam in the American landscape, Then there are our own issues meaning our own amongst Muslims, issues relating to developing a healthy identity in this country as a practicing Muslim and as an American. Issues that previous generations of immigrants have already sort of gone through, though those of us, like myself, I'm not a new immigrant. My family immigrated here many generations ago, and maybe it's ironic, helped to build the Catholic, the Catholic institutions that are in this country now. Now I'm here generations later, helping to build the Islamic institutions in this country. But the type of issues that minority Muslims, minority indigenous Muslims face, as well as the immigrant Muslims face in terms of overcoming stereotypes and in the external, and at the same time developing a healthy internal identity that merges their new Americanness with an Islamic religion that's also new to America. That is a real genuine challenge that we're facing.
I'm so glad that you could be here today to help us understand better what you're doing. I'm so glad you're here today. To all of you, I'll throw this out. As was mentioned earlier, most Western democracies provide partial or full funding for schools that parents choose. The U.S. is an exception. You have to compete against public schools and privately funded, privately operated schools that receive similar streams of funding, and yet you do a better job. How are you managing to do that?
It's hard. I mean, it's one of our greatest challenges. For a very long time, we were able to compete. Catholic schools were able to compete because our labor force was subsidized by mostly religious women, and we don't have that giant labor subsidy anymore. So for us, we keep our costs down. We have less administration. We only have core academic course programs. We don't pay our teachers enough, unfortunately, and that's something that has to change. But
I think in some schools it's half of what they could make in public schools.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Some cases, I saw one figure where in Lutheran schools, a starting teacher made half of what a teacher would make in the New York public schools, and an average principal's salary was half what they were in the New York public schools.
Right.
Sorry, yeah, you're right, huge problem.
It is a huge problem for us. But for us, we're looking at parental choice programs as part of the solution, because these are things like tax credits and vouchers, ways that parents exercise their right to the best education they think for their child. We think that those programs have potential to help sustain the legacy of urban Catholic schools to serve low-income communities.
Happening to the rest of you, how are you outperforming the other schools?
Similar, scale of efficiency and making sure that we're not squandering the blessings. In our situation, there is the requirement that everyone pays something, so all of our families are contributing, and then our message to the community here in Dallas is that we have families that are not only paying tuition, they're also asked to make a donation, a contribution above and beyond their tuition. And having secured that, then we move out to the broader community, and we raise over $2 million a year to subsidize what we are not collecting in tuition. And we do that through fundraisers, through grant writing, through a lot of tours. And fundraising is a necessary nuisance for us. It has to be done, and so we do what we have to do to make that possible. But the community of Dallas is convinced that there's an opportunity where faith, people who are celebratory of the type of outcomes that we're able to yield, is worth supporting. And so we have people who will step up and help us to make it from year to year.
So I don't know if it's inspired by Dr. Glenn or the fact that I'm from Milwaukee, or the fact that I had a lot of Shiner Bock last night. I'm not sure which of the three. But I really want to speak boldly to the politicians because I just believe very firmly that we ought to be much more aggressive on the voucher argument. And the reason I think that is because everybody shies away from it because it's the most aggressive reform in terms of funding schools or alternative ways of funding schools. But the thing is, this is really for the politicians, if you go for tax credits, all the same people that hate you because you do that are going to hate you because of vouchers. So you might as well go for the whole enchilada. And that's and I would
You
say
picked up the local lingo.
I would say in Milwaukee, we're seeing the benefits of that. We've had a problem in Milwaukee of not doing accountability well. So some of the things that Dr. Glenn talked about, we need to get better at accountability and actually figuring out how to weed out really bad voucher schools. But on the high end, the most innovative movement in Milwaukee and where there is the most innovation, the most entrepreneurialism is in the voucher sector, because there's so much freedom for people to grab onto that and do something unique with a school. And so I urge you politicians to be courageous and be brave. And to echo what Terry said, in the church, we've got to stand up and push for that. It's something that we need to be more courageous about.
Politicians and the preachers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, echoing and reiterating some of what has already been shared, obviously, when you have to support yourself, when you have to support your institution, we're talking institutional cost, 100% without help from outside. That means that you need to have the tuition there, and you need to have the donations there from your primarily from your own community. You scrutinize where every single dollar goes, and if you consider how much it costs if you just imagine how much it should cost for the salary and benefit of one person, and then weigh that against how difficult it is to raise $100,000. I don't know how you raise $2 million a year, but just to raise $100,000 is such a squeeze. And if we have a big fundraiser where we raised $500,000, we have a big celebration, then there's the task of collecting that money from the people who said they would give it to us. And then there's a lot of, if God wills, I will give you that money.
That's right.
Have a godly intention of giving the money to you. And so there's some of that going on too. I believe I will be able to give you that when I have the money to give it to you. So that's also part of the faith-based environment. So definitely, you have to scrutinize all your resources and make sure that every penny is being maximized. We are in the same boat as far as feeling that our teachers are not paid enough, and because they definitely are not. The administrators also would be far less in an Islamic institution than they would be in a publicly supported institution, obviously. And their pay is also going to be much less. And we do also struggle with leadership issues for the same reason, some of the same reasons that you mentioned, being able to identify those leaders and also justifying the costs for those leaders, which is another factor. But what leads to our success in spite of those challenges, I think, is because we do have the families have a choice. They have chosen to attend our school, and that gives you some leverage, as you mentioned, that you can require your families to be involved and that they are putting a financial commitment there as well, even if that's a small one, or they're very aware that somebody is putting a donor's dollar behind their child, and that can't be taken lightly either. So we definitely have that element of family involvement, and the fact that the families have taken their choice in coming to a school seriously and done it at their own expense. And then we can also, because each of our schools is independently governed, we have the freedom to do many things without entanglement from the government or other regulatory bodies. We can self-impose accountability measures like standardized testing and so forth, but we can also draw a line when we feel as a school that those measures are not worth the cost. And then educators and the community members supporting the school are making those direct decisions as opposed to someone in a political office somewhere that would be removed from that specific school community. Those all are important factors that help us to become successful, I think, in spite of our limited resources.
Thank you. Those are all great suggestions. Let me ask you just a quick question, and then we'll go to the last question of your success stories. But I'm wondering, if $50 million dropped into your lap, what levers would you reach for to improve your schools? Would it be teacher training and salaries, scholarships, technology? What would you reach for first? Just a quick.
I'll be first.
Okay.
Grab that money before they get We clearly address our faculty salaries. I mean, if you look at independent schools, private schools, faith-based schools, you're going to find that that's an area, not all, but most of challenge. If you look at public schools, all teachers are not compensated to the level that they should be. So we definitely do that, and we have some fine-tuning of professional development, things like that. Then we would place some of those dollars into endowment to help with sustaining, and then we would start doing much of what Kole is doing, and that is multiplying, developing training programs so that other schools can be established along the lines of the same model, leadership development for institutions beyond St. Philip's.
I would echo that if I had $50 million, I would hire Kole. No, wow. I would plow it into leadership formation. I think what Kole's doing in Milwaukee is really kind of radical in its goal to tip an entire city like Milwaukee. And I think that we have to plow it into leadership formation. It's our single biggest challenge. I've chaired 4 principal searches in the last 2 years, and identifying and cultivating talented people to lead our schools is our big challenge.
I'm a lot cheaper date than that, Christian.
50 million.
I just, the leadership issue, both in terms of the schools and specifically on the faith-based side, the pastorate is one of our biggest challenges. If we don't figure that out, we're sunk.
I thought about this more, because initially I was thinking the salaries have to be addressed as well, and I won't back down on that. However, the more I thought about the issue of scholarships, the more sense it makes, because that's a way to address all the other issues by making sure that everything else you invest in goes through a student or multiple students. So if you're able to make sure that the $50 million is coming in there while you're filling up seats that might have otherwise people couldn't afford them, or they weren't filled, or you're able to open more schools that are successful along the lines of what we've been talking about, because you have the capacity to help families make that choice affordable, then definitely you can address all the other financial needs of the institution while making sure that all the seats are full. And that's probably the biggest shame is that another one of the successes is the smallness. The schools tend to be on the smaller side. And so no child really, you do create, especially because of your religious ethic, that sense of common bond that, we're from the same Creator and we have an obligation to one another. So there really is a moral obligation not to let any child fall through the cracks or be left behind, as it's commonly said. So that small environment, that family and community environment that's built in that school, that opportunity should be made available to more people. And to me, the only shame is how many seats I could have filled with people who just couldn't afford to go there.
That is a heartache. Well, that leads us to our last question on how we're keeping this covenant to educate the poor populations in our inner cities. And I wonder if each of you could give us just one success story or one statistic to bring home to our audience why what you do is so important and that it's working.
Sure. I'll just share one success story that we've been blessed to be part of is at St. John the Evangelist on the south side of Tucson. It's a school that serves the poorest community in the 6th poorest city in the United States. And they were down to 130 kids a couple weeks away from closure. The teachers agreed to take a 10% pay cut to keep the school open through the end of the year. They had their 6th principal in 5 years. The deck was just really stacked against them. And those same teachers are all still there today, 4 years later. But the school is completely transformed. And all we've done is try to put tools in their hands. And one of the key things that we've done is we've put a tool in the principal's hand that makes a big difference. And that tool is helping principals hold teachers accountable for student learning. Because now the teachers know that someone is looking to see whether kids are learning. They used to be invited back for the next year and get their cost of living raised if they just showed up on time. And now it's about student learning. And we've put the student at the center of everything that happens in the school. And so we've seen kids go from the 17th percentile on average in math to the 52nd, which is, now they're above average. We still will lean on them to push them further, but our kindergartners are reading in the top 10% in the country, in the 6th poorest community in the nation. And so ultimately what we want for our kids in these schools is exactly what I want for my kids. My oldest is in kindergarten at our parish school, and it's a parish that has Notre Dame faculty and has all the benefits that you might expect with that. But right now our schools in Tucson are outperforming the school I send my son to. And that's something that I'm really proud of.
Well, we're actually out of time, but I'll let you all finish and then we'll go to questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'll go to a student who I met in a homeless shelter that was timing out, meaning he's aging out and his family hadn't established opportunity to establish housing. And so what was happening at that point, we have a daycare here in Dallas that serves preschoolers who are homeless. And what typically happens is that those kids then have to go to public school, and then they move around a lot because the families still haven't established housing and they're timed out. And so we were able to get some resources to help bring that child to our school. And that child was able to go through our school, establish himself really well, and take advantage of the various social service programs that are provided through our community center. Is bound to go and attend Johns Hopkins, transferred from us to go on to another great private school here in Dallas, and is going on to the university there, and his siblings coming along. But the other factor there, which is vitally important, is we have to remember that the faith observance in our society is on a decline. And this kid's parents were not people of faith. And through their son having the experience at St. Philip's and the family being embraced by our community, they have turned their lives around. And so now they have housing, now they have a car, they both have jobs. And that's all a part of even more than him, his academic success. All of his kids are going through great schools. All of his siblings are going through great schools, and he has been able to, through that experience, get his family engaged, and just a wonderful example of what can be done.
Well, it sure is. Kole?
Yeah, I mean, I talk often about how this is life and death, the work that we do, and so, I mean, I'll talk about St. Marcus in a second, which is definitely a mountaintop story. But since St. Marcus, I've been involved in opening a number of schools, and most of them have been really successful. There have been some that were a bit of a struggle. And so I lived firsthand kind of valley experiences where we weren't good at what we were doing because we expanded too quickly. We lost some kids who are in jail, who are dead. So I know that there are some ACERs here, and we talk about this from a faith standpoint. This is vitally important in terms of the eternal destinies. There's also some immediacy in terms of life and death issues for the children that we serve. So we need to make no mistake about that. The mountaintop story for me is really the St. Marcus story, which was arriving at St. Marcus in 2001, a crumbling parish school, 90 students, lower test scores than the neighboring public schools, and then very quickly grew the school, changed the culture. We had an amazing team of people that was a mixture of veteran teachers who were parish teachers who'd been there for a long time, and so half of them were old-timers, half were new young teachers that were, and they both came together and said, let's do something different. And what we achieved was essentially a completely transformed school that did go on to become and is now a national model for faith-based schools in urban education. Lots of my former students are in college doing well, and they have 700 students now at St. Marcus today, and are just one of the highest performing schools in the state serving African American students in Wisconsin. So.
Wonderful. Matthew?
Well, I'll start off a little light, and as a teacher, I would always ask my students at the beginning of the year what they would like to be when they grow up, and they would say mostly doctors and engineers. So the first success story I'd like to cite is when I saw my students graduating and becoming teachers. Not that we don't need doctors and engineers, but we need teachers too. So I thought that was the real success story, to see the students becoming teachers. Some of them have become doctors and engineers as well, and most of my students, since I'm not that old yet, are still in school. So the successes are coming. But what I really wanted to share, there are so many examples everywhere. I want to juxtapose two. We have some even right here in Dallas, which I'm familiar with, but I want to use a Seattle and a Buffalo, New York. These are like our two horns over here in the United States. The Universal School of Buffalo and the community that school supports actually at one point decided to purchase an available Catholic church and the school and the community and move into the community around that church, and had completely revitalized that community by doing that. It's an unusual case where people would decide to actually move in to that type of place and have that transformation on that area by becoming part of the community and interacting with it, instead of taking all their resources and going somewhere else. The Islamic School of the Islamic School of Seattle started in the urban core of Seattle in a historic building. And in that case, the opposite happened, where those, as people became more affluent there, they were able to put the resources together to open a new school up in the suburbs and to move away from that urban core. And the school stayed open for 30 years. It just closed this last year. But what the bright spot there, I think, one of the things that really touched me about it, at the end, they were mainly serving the refugee children and the poor indigenous children of that neighborhood, regardless of faith. And there was another, the founder of that school told me that there was a church that was actually renting its space, and they raised money to donate to keep that school open. Which tells me that even if the school had to close, and it's not going to continue for however long, but its impact for however long that was must have really been valuable to that community there.
That is wonderful. Well, I'm probably going to get fired as a moderator for going too long. Are we out of time? Well, I'm sorry I did go too long, but I thought that was definitely worth it. I'm glad we got to hear those success stories. We do have a short 15-minute break, and then you'll be back in this room, and I'll ask our panelists if they could maybe stay over to the side, and you could come and ask them your questions. We'll do that. Thank you again. Glad to have you on. Thank you.